Well, good evening to you and welcome to this program of Rodney Groundings. I'm your host, Dion Abrams, and with me on the program this evening is Brother Takuma Ugonse, and we'll be continuing our usual discourse on the political situation in Guyana. Last week's program was replayed at the request of some viewers who, particularly Mr. Noel, who said he wanted, he spoke with some people whom he asked to look at the program, and he even requested that I replay it this week again.
That's pushing it a little too.
but I think fresh things are in the air, so we have to
move forward.
Forward, right? So welcome, Brother Ugon, to the program.
It is always usual a pleasure.
And of course, you must know that this program is normally aired on Wednesday evenings on the Walter Rodney Groundings on Facebook. That program is hosted by Kidaki. But as a part of that program, this particular program is also aired. And, Channel 9 is supposed to have a live feed, but when it's up and running, we let you know so that you can inform people so that you can view the program live through the link, which we will put on the screen once that is available to you. But of course, for other persons, you can view YouTube because it's normally uploaded, and then you can go to Forbes Abrams YouTube channel, and then you will see and share Walter Rodney Groundings. Lots of things have been happening in our society, Brother Hogan. You had a few deaths in Buxton to all the relatives of all those persons who have died. Godfrey Adams, a number of people have died. I can't even remember all the names, but I wanted to send condolences to all those. Godfrey was a man called Beaufort. He was associated with the University of Guyana Workers Union. Yeah, very vibrant and so on. He was buried yesterday. And stalwart in the trade union movement.
As in the cultural movement, you see how you go away one by one.
Yeah, one by one. yeah.
But it's I join with you, to extend the party condolences to all of the villagers who have passed. That village is also very important to us historically, politically.
Well, we had Shellon's daughter, we had my cousin, Patsy Trim. Godfrey is also a relative of mine from the Sam's link, and so on. So that when Buxton begins to get funerals,
get a row.
It comes, and then it eases, and then once you have a death, then you expect a flood.
March. March the land with the ancestors.
So that's how it is. It's always been like that. Miss Dottie, yes, she's a very respectable 94, I think she was. She also passed on, right? But it seems as though the administration incumbent is on a march in relation to Mr. Lowenfield and Mr. Mingo. The recent arrest of Mr. Lowenfield is, how do you view this development, this continued prosecution?
I think I think it is political harassment, and I'm very concerned that the police is allowing themselves to be used in this particular way to harass these citizens. If you tell me that you have been investigating this matter for some time, or you have already imposed a number of charges on a person, and you tell the nation you have over 100 and something witnesses to bring, and you're still fishing for more evidence, it raises the question that you really, into a certain way, really have. And it's really these recent charges here is just really a kind of provocation and a kind of abuse of power, because you could instruct the police to harass a citizen. You do that, you know. And I find, because the person is in court, you know where to find them. You don't have to impose a traditional arrest. You can invite them to the police station, tell them what you want to tell them. But to go and to look for person and arrest them and to carry them to the station that way, it's provocation. To me, it's totally unnecessary. It's harassment. And I think that people should begin to speak out on it. You see, we have to be careful that in the pursuit, those who say they're pursuing justice and democracy, you gotta be careful that you don't encourage politicians with political excesses, which they use as a cover under the clout that they're pursuing some correction of democracy and the rule of law, when in fact they're just waging political vendetta. Because even I'm not a lawyer, but I can see them having a serious case against the two gentlemen until an election court ruled that there were irregularities and established those irregularities. Until the election court established the irregularities, I don't think the police have a basis that they could win the case that these two persons committed electoral violations. But the lawyers will be better informed on these matters. But I just find it the constant arrest is just provocation and abuse of power.
Yeah, but what about the nation's response to you're calling on people to speak out? One of the things that we find, and I think I know that the reason for it is that the militancy of supporters is somewhat on the low.
Yeah.
It has been dampened by events pertaining to the elections and so on. But I think at some point people have to begin to understand that if they don't represent one, that it will lead to, give the impression that advantage can be taken of anyone.
Yeah.
And when we're dealing with the PPP, it's not something that is new in terms of how they behave against the citizenry, and particularly people who are opposed to their way of or style of leadership and rule. So agitation is necessary, just as the people of Belladrum would have come out and demonstrated solidarity with Mingo so that they eventually let him go from the police station after the abuse of power that you're talking about, having him beyond the 72 hours and just, coming up with flimsy reasons for detaining him, outside the law. These arrests, which, as you have pointed out, they really have no basis. We have to begin to somehow,
until they're established in the court. You see, the offense got to be established that this actually occurred.
Yes. So, apart from having people demonstrate their support, whether it's through the social media, whatever platform you want to use, we need voices to be raised and to denounce this kind of foolishness so that it somehow stops. I was listening to the budget debate, and I heard the Minister of Home Affairs, saying that killing the prisoners at Lusignan was necessary. How does that come across, man, to you as a...
There's uncivilized behavior, it's viciousness, but it's the characteristics of the PPP's political leadership, that they have little respect for human life, and worse if it's black lives. And I'm very unapologetic about it. I think the PPP over the years have developed deliberately a kind of political callousness and an inhuman approach to human problems. Now, once you have a prison, certain things follows. You're going to get prison uprising, prison revolts. And in this particular case, with the COVID issue, I think prisoners have a good justification to be concerned. You know, and one of the persons who get killed, I understand, was about to come out of the prison. He ended there for some fight he had with somebody. And he probably was to come out of prison next 2 weeks and he gets shot in his stomach, you know, and get killed.
Yeah, but I listen to
and I can't see how it's very uncivilized for government ministers to go among prisoners or among any sections of the community and to insist, you know, that the authorities deal with these problems the way they seems to be suggesting, and that killing people is no big thing. You know, it is that mentality that led to the 2002-2005 crisis. That same mentality, and they don't seem to have learned. They don't seem to have learned.
But a report from out of the prison, the prisoners themselves, their account was that Minister Ben and Dr. Frank Anthony went to the prison, right? And when they were inquiring of them what they were going to do about the situation, that Ben used expletives at them, saying that he and so and so key and whatever and so on, and then gave instructions to the police,
to the guards,
to shoot, to kill. That's the prisoner's account. Now, if that is true, how?
As I was saying, you know, I would not be surprised that it's true, because I think it's consistent with their mindset.
Okay.
They have very little regards to human life. And when they interpret a social condition that could impact negatively on their political power, like they will see that uprising in the prison, they would see it not the way the APM UFC government have seen it, as a logic of incarceration and so forth, but they doesn't interpret it as threatening the government. All the prison revolts that we had under the APMU government, the government never treated it as a threat to the government's survival. Okay. But the PPP will treat those things as a threat to their survival. And therefore, they got one answer to that. And that answer is to use maximum force, kill people if necessary. That is their mindset. And it is that mindset that will put them into trouble. And I have said before, they don't want people to advise them on these matters. If they believe that they got a line of march, that they think is in the best interest of themselves and the country, let them go forward, you know. They're going to reap the harvest. Where you sow, you reap.
Yeah, it's a sad thing.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, when I listen to this man, I wonder whether he fell out of space or something. Whether he had no kind of, I mean, he said it in a matter of fact.
And I read somewhere, you know, where the head of the prisons said that there will not be an investigation. I don't know how you could have an incident where 2 inmates were being shot and a number of them were being wounded in a scenario where guards from a tower shoot into unarmed people, shooting them in the stomach and probably even the back and so, and there's no inquiry.
That's the point. I mean,
that's so basic, man.
The prison has a number of towers around it. You know, if you would drive, I drive there regularly to go into the farm and so on, and they have the vantage point. They can see what is happening in there.
Well, you could find the ear to alert prisoners that this thing could become serious and thing. But I can't see no justification for any guard. Tell me in the context of what I've heard that there's justification to shoot into a crowd of armed prisoners the way they did, without force shooting up in the air, around the ground and alerting the prisoners that look. I find it as callous behavior. And for the government ministers and the prison office, the prison officer in charge is saying that he don't think there'll be an investigation. I find it's ridiculous. There must be an investigation, man. That is a basic human civilized decency in these matters.
It's sad. I want to raise the question of I mean, I'm not hearing a lot about it, but there is a severe shortage of drugs in the medical institutions across the country. Uh, and I don't know, we not whenever they always were accusing the APNU of having situations with drug shortage, but people are going to the hospitals and they're not getting medication, and nobody is saying anything about it. You know.
Well, you know, to see about these things, you gotta have access to the media, you know.
Well, that's the point.
And I guess they will want to say that they just get into office and that they just pass a budget and now they're going to be able to deal with those things, you know. But we're going to see. Yeah. Give them a few weeks, let me see.
Yeah, but they need to address that. Because what is happening, people are going to the hospital and they're sending them to the clinics to see if they can get from a clinic maybe out of the Georgetown or some place or the other. So you got to go looking for the medication, right? And it's really absurd. It's absurd. And of course, some people might just want to store, if they have, to keep them for people who they're associated with
that they serve,
right? That they serve and all of these things. So we need to get that fixed, and we need to get it fixed immediately. At least some statement should be made by the Minister of Health or some relative authority on what is going to happen in the next few weeks. All right, so that people can at least somehow be at ease and be assured that things are going to be regularized. Now, we've had a recent call. I don't know what is the genesis of this, by Mr. Harm for talks with the president. What road are they going down?
Oh yeah, like you, it caught me a bit by surprise. You know, it's something one did not anticipate and expect, that the leader of the opposition would want at this time to take an initiative like that, because I don't think the PPP will respond positive to it. In fact, they will treat you with contempt, as they have done. And I can't see what the opposition has to gain from trying to push that initiative. From reading what Harman seems to be suggesting, is that there's a number of policy issues which the government have done since they resume office, and the opposition is in the dark on those. Okay. Looking at what has been said, the major one seems to be the agreement they signed with the United States as a result of Pompeo visit. But for me, I would advise the leader of the opposition at this time not to get himself caught up with any discussion on this matter with with President Ali, you know, in a one-to-one situation. We should press them to reveal, you know, what they sign in public or in written form, because the danger the opposition leader opens himself to is that if he meets the president on that matter, the president will not reveal in full the full implications of what he signed. But if trouble comes, he could always say he had briefed the opposition fully. And you have no way of proving that he wasn't fully briefed. So he's going to want to force you to have some ownership, of the negatives, by saying in the personal briefing, I briefed him fully and complete. He knew everything.
And he didn't know.
And he did nothing. You know, so I think Harman will be very well advised, at least from the way I see it, to avoid meeting the president, you know, in a one-to-one on the question of the agreement he signs with Pompeo. I mean, we have about another 3-4 weeks to get a good indication as to exactly what will play out. And I don't see you lose nothing as opposition to wait and see, rather than to plunge into that discussion and the man could whitemail you subsequently by accusing you of being well informed of everything, So I think you have more to lose than to gain, and that's how I see it. I don't think it's well thought out. I don't think it is good politics. And it does give the PPP the high ground, to treat you with contempt.
Yeah, make it seem as though
you're begging.
Yeah, you're begging. Because, I mean, even before the handing over of the government, I mean, the former president had indicated some,
they indicated you have the willing to meet.
Right.
Let them take the initiative and call the meeting,
Right.
But,
when Jack Dio realized that they were going to get into power, he said that
he's interested in meeting.
You understand?
Yeah, and I've been reading the PP remarks. So, the PP is basically saying you got in court, you don't accept the election results. There's nothing, no business can be done. They play a hard line, hard ball politics with you. And you got to respond in kind. You can't look to think that you're weak, and you more anxious for discussion with them than they're with you. Because, I mean, I've heard a PP, a passing a discourse in the kitty market, you got a lot of Indian elements, and PP elements. And I've heard a discourse, and one of them saying, they want we lock them up. They want beg now. They want beg they want beat them now. They want get locked up. That's how the populace begin to interpret it. That you're under pressure, and you're seeking to meet to save your skin. Okay. Which I don't know that is true, but I just say it as I heard it. These things you've got to be very careful with. The perception that things will have out there.
But in the meantime, while we're awaiting, you were saying we have 3 weeks or so on to fully realize what this agreement between Pompeo and Finale really might be. But I saw on Facebook, I don't know how true it is, that American soldiers on our borders,
There's a lot of rumors going on. I got to say rumors here and all kinds of things. I hear they got both Russian, American warships outside and Chinese warships.
Yeah.
So here's a whole array in the Caribbean Sea outside of Venezuela warships. I don't know, but you're getting these information.
I saw that one too.
So I don't
outside, know. Just off Grenada and coming across.
The Caribbean Sea is a very ships and so
been
brought into the theater.
Into the Caribbean Sea, and then we've had the incident where they are saying that it's the rogue elements in the Venezuelan military shooting at our officers. But my understanding is, from what I heard, that the regiment that had the Americans with it, they were not shot at. It's just
Guyanese.
You see?
No, but I mean, this thing could become very problematic for Guyana. I mean, nobody wants to actually have an experience of Guyana being caught in any hot fight, between the Americans and the Venezuelans and the Russians and the Chinese, and missiles flying across. What with GDF there? GDF headquarters there by the seawall. Right. And people could deliberately send a missile, broke 3 parts of the seawall, float go to the water, and argues a legitimate target they were trying to hit at Ayingano. So I mean, there's a lot of worrying possibilities, And we just have to hope we don't get to that. But I am convinced, I got a gut feelings that the Americans don't want a hot war with the Russians and the Chinese over Venezuela. I think they want to confront the Russians with a formidable military threat and force them to decide whether they want to fight in the American backyard, which militarily gives the Americans advantage. Because after the first round of your resources that you have deployed
to get them back,
you got to reinforce. China got come from till Asia, and Russia got come from Europe, and says a long distance. Americans are just their home. So militarily, the U.S. military planners probably is trying to convince the politicians that, look, they ain't gonna fight. And they may put pressure on Maduro for a compromise along what America is interested in. But these are high risk gambles. So I think, but these things will get out of hand.
Yeah. But
because you see, for Trump, he wouldn't want American body bags coming home at election time. I don't think he got any appetite for American body. So to me, it's not so much the interesting in a hot war, but the interesting to create military conditions that will create political advantage to them, and hopefully that the Russians will say, like in the Cuban Missile Crisis, it makes sense pursuing it.
Yeah, but they're not. It's not only Russia and China. Iran recently sent a ship to offload billions a whole lot of oil.
So
it's
a big power.
This alleged incursion of American ships, battleships, and all of these things is really to deal with all. And then you have the Russian warplanes that have been sent to Venezuela. And we don't even have a proper helicopter to engage.
We can't talk about no military engagement. We're just a prawns. We get caught in the middle, and we will have no defenses. So we got to hope we don't reach to that point.
There is the other side. I mean, it's not a racist argument, but they're saying that people are arguing that the military is predominantly African Guyanese. And they're saying that's what they're saying, that the PPP really doesn't care. If it comes to that people going to the front lines are going to basically be Africans.
Yeah, but it's a high risk game because the African soldiers could decide that they're going and turn come back home.
Well, that's
so these are very high risk things,
But even
though you might think it's an advantage to you to risk African lives. Soldiers are human beings, and they could very well say, I ain't going. And then you them got a story and they turn the venom upon you.
Well,
so these are high risk things which we hope we gotta hope don't happen. Because it could be a very messy situation.
Well, let's hope, because I mean, and then there's I don't know if you listened to Mia Motley and the hypocrisy in her.
No, I haven't heard anything from her recently. What she be saying?
She was saying that the CARICOM is formally against any kind of intervention in the affairs of Venezuela. It's a Caribbean. Not she alone. I think the Grenadian Prime Minister also was making the point, and he was arguing that he hopes that Guyana, in meeting with Pompeo, that they weren't going contrary to the position of CARICOM, that it's the policy is one of non-interference and so on, and all of that. But I don't get a sense that we are towing that line at all.
Yeah, we will know. They say they're claiming that they do nothing to compromise the country, but you will know eventually. Because I mean, look, in politics, they would never tell you that they signed an agreement that give the Americans access, military, access to waters to use against Venezuela. They would never say that.
Not only the water, the air.
And the air, and so they wouldn't say so. Right. They would always tell you no, and they will always tell you, all kinds of things. But the test is common when the practicality of the situation unfold them, who talking the truth and who lying.
Well, let's hope.
Let's hope we don't get to that.
Yeah, for our sake.
For our sake.
Yeah.
The Americans can look after themselves, but we can't look after ourselves militarily.
Yeah, we can look after ourselves. Now, our budget, we're moving from one thing to the other. I find a major concern is this rush to open the closed sugar estates when there is no clear vision on making these entities viable. I mean, the PPP had 23 years of it. They still couldn't produce sugar at a competitive level with the other international producers. And here it is that they're putting $5 billion into sugar and are declaring estates open. The last thing I heard them saying is that they have already begun to re-employ persons who were laid off under the APNU administration. Essentially, we've been arguing that, I don't know what it's politics here, but you're keeping a number of persons in an area of employ that really harks back to conditions that are basically retrograde, cane cutting, hardware labor, encouraging people not to move forward with their lives, finding other avenues for them to develop. They had been discussing mechanization of the sugar estates, but they have never gone down that road. Even the estates in the West Berbice quarantine area, they were exploring the idea of mechanization. And simply because they want to keep the cane cutters as cane cutters, they haven't gone into using machines to cut canes and all of these things to develop the fields in a way that would allow for that kind of mechanization. And here you are, you're saying you're going to open these estates again. And we don't see any value in that kind of thing, because I don't see the production costs going down. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I agree with you. It's clearly not an economic, the justification is not economics.
Okay.
It's clear politics. The PP recognize that historically, their political power was based on the sugar workers and the rural community, and that they want to make good their manifesto promise to return those sugar industries into operation and allow the oil money and allow the country to bleed in order to to justify that. This is their way of making sure that they keep that junk of support. So they're holding the rest of Guyana at ransom in order to satisfy their political base. So it's not really economics. There's no way those sugar industries between now and 2025 could become economically viable. They can't produce sugar to compete with as you correctly said, with the other international producers, and they can't diverse the industry significantly enough in 5 years, so that you will probably use the raw sugar to make some other added value commodities. I don't think you could do it. So for between now and the next 5 years, sugar will be a drain on the economy, but they want to make sure when the 2025 elections come, they got the sugar workers behind them. So that is the price the country has to pay for the PAP to hold on to those sugar workers' votes. So it got nothing really to do with economics. It got to do with political survival and to keep loyalty. And there's a difference between the PPP and the APMU AFC government. A large part of our base lies with the public sector workers. And we, instead of paying significant wages to public sector workers very early in the government, and to ignore some other developmental priorities, push them back, but consolidate your base. We didn't do that. The PPA is not the PPM playing the political game. Right away, they're consolidating the base. They don't decide that 2025 we'll meet that election, we'll reach them with a loyal sugar worker base. And not only sugar workers, all the families. So you're talking about thousands of votes.
And they're going to use the argument that they're going to close down the estates
again. You see? And when we had a chance to empower the public servants who suffered 23 years of low wages by the PPP, our government, didn't understand that it was important for them to give significant increases even at the expense of other developmental matters. Politics, you gotta be real. You can't get your supporters suffering for 23 years with these starvation wages and the impact it have on their families and the social conditions and economic conditions in the country. And when you come to power, they vote you to power, you give them 6% and 3% and 5%, they're meager, and they say you're treating me just like the people you're treating me. Give them significant increases at the expense of other things.
And giving yourself 50%.
You know. Anyway, but that's the people show you that they do it different.
And they have no apologies.
No apologies. They stay very upfront.
You know,
they have no apologies. I mean, it carries us to the nurses' protests. I mean, the nurses have been out there protesting, you know, the COVID-19 situation. They have been demanding better personal gears. They have demanding, you know, overtime pay. They've been demanding risk allowance. I think those are justified things, man. Every part of the world right now, the health workers are being treated with some great priority. And I think that in Guyana condition, where our health workers are so exposed because the kind of wear protective equipment that we give them are below international standards, that their lives are a greater danger, okay, than in many other areas. And the fact that the virus is increasing and deaths are increasing, the government should be more sensitive, you know, to public, the nurses and the medical workers in general. But they don't care very much because they see them as public sector workers, you know, and they don't. I mean, a large part of them of that sector is outside their support base, so they don't give the same priority. But they could find money because when they roll back taxes for businessmen, they give them concessions and tax relief. They're transferring this cash they're transferring to the rich and the powerful, the business community, at the expense of workers. You know, they can't increase, they don't put aside no money to increase workers' wages. I mean, it's an abomination. And workers and the leaders have to be serious. You see, this is the point I was making throughout the life of the APMU government. I was critical of particularly the public sector workers, unions, and the leadership. And I've always argued from the time when the government increased its own wages, its own salaries by the 50% in some cases or what, the union should have come out and give a massive protest. And I'm telling you, if those unions that came out, the public service unions came out and gave a massive protest at that forced action of this government would be in power today. And if along the route when they were fighting for increased wages and for get the government to honor collective bargaining, if the public sector workers union have put a 2 or 3 day strike on the APMU AFC government, they would have been in power today. So we find the unions now find themselves in a situation where you fail to effectively defend your workers under APMU government, which you think is closer to you and you're willing to give them space. But you see, workers have to be more militant, because in this thing about politics, money is always there. It's always a question of priority. And I keep emphasizing that the workers, despite your support for the APMU government, you got to understand as workers, you got to fight for your wages and your salaries and your increases. You must become a major priority of the government. They are failed to do that. And the PPP going to use that, and is using that now to say that, you know, they just come into power. You know, you had 5 years of the APMU, AFC government. You don't fight for any big wage, but they put you under pressure. But the workers got to put them under pressure, because right away they have taken millions of dollars of the state money and give to private businessmen. They have already transferred by this budget hundreds of millions of dollars to private businessmen, which could pay the workers increased bill easily with change. So workers ought not to, whether it's nurses, public service, army, police, whoever in the public sector, you got to begin to fight. And according to the finance minister, the workers' leaders got to listen to these things. We were accustomed to economic development of the economy by 3%, and if we say we get to 4%, we're lucky and we feel good. According to the minister, it is predicted, okay, that it will develop by 51%. And much of that 51 from 3 or 4% to 51% coming from oil revenue. So money is not a problem. Money for give workers significant increases is not a problem. Right away, right now, is not a problem.
And how does the argument about having more cash available driving inflation?
That's all capitalist IMF argument. But even the IMF now, have tried to become more realistic with some of those arguments. And more so in the face of COVID and all. You can't argue, the arguments doesn't hold. But the point I'm making is that with the inflow of oil, the government itself have said that the economy will grow by 51%, which means there will be tremendous amount of revenue in the government hand. And the workers shouldn't wait. They have to press for the increases in wages. Start your fight. Because this budget, there is an anti-working class budget. It is a budget for the rich and the powerful. The continuation of what the PP have done in the 23 years, siphon off from the state resources and hand it to the favorites, support base, supporters and so. And it's the same policy. That's why the private sector, they're happy. So why is the workers and the children starving? The rich get richer, and we have a parasitic private sector. It doesn't respond. You see, in America, you could argue to some extent that if you give relief to the private sector, it will generate increased employment and wealth. That in the classic developed capitalist economy, there is a justification at some point for that kind of argument. But we're dealing with a parasitic set of capitalists here who don't produce nothing much. They're mercantile capitalists, they import. You understand? They import, they don't produce. And importation doesn't provide a lot of sustainable employment. And then we have a private sector which keep over more than 3/4 of the money outside the country in the safe havens in foreign banks. So the economic logic that you could argue in America and in developed capitalist countries, that if you give the business community, favorable conditions, it will result in more employment and creation of new wealth, don't hold for Guyana. This here is a rip-off. So you're asking the workers and the families to bear the strain, live under malnourished wages and so, but the rich who got umpteen millions of dollars, you give them more money. And that this budget is, the philosophy behind the budget is anti-working class, and to some extent it is racist.
Well, we just have to hope that, I don't know, I know WPA is no longer a part of the APNU, but you've been mentioning the APNU government. But I firmly believe that prior to the elections, we noticed how the private sector was behaving. And the key elements, the head of the private sector commission was raving and ranting and carrying on to the extent that, he basically wanted to have the government overthrown. He was calling on the U.S. government and all of these things to intervene into the affairs of the country and all of that. But they benefited significantly, in particular, benefited significantly from the largest of the PPP during the 23 years. And I guess losing that kind of the opportunities that were available to him during that time, that was maybe the driving force behind the way he behaved. And a lot of the others who were involved in that. But then even as we argue that way, we know that the APNU government did not redirect the economy in any significant way to challenge resources outside of the ambit of the private sector, that they were still reaping, the hog.
But when you're greedy, a greedy person is never satisfied. And we have a set of business people, who treat money like if they idolize money. There's some cultural things you don't like to, probably got to keep a special program to this, but you see, but what is important is that people got to recognize that governments are not innocent things. Governments are instruments which human beings use to acquire wealth. The American government was used to take away Mexico land and integrate it into America. Take away indigenous people land and give white Americans. A government is always an instrument that could be used to shape and reshape economic and social realities. And this is what you see. A APMU government shaped the reality in a certain way. A PPP government shaped the reality in a different way. And that is why the people like, Jerry Govaya and all of the private sector elements, they are fighting because they know what is in stake for them. Because you see, they're not fighting only because of what they've lost in the 5 years of the APMU. They are fighting with what's common. You see, that a lot of African people and Amerindian people haven't understand the money that is involved in oil and gas in the coming years. And because a lot of our constituents are not, we got a large, capitalist class, our reflexes on these matters are much slower than Indian business interests and Portuguese business interests. Mm-hmm. They're not fighting now about what passed. They're chicken feed. They're fighting about the real money that is to come with the oil. And that is what makes this situation, potentially dangerous. And people have to fight because it's a new dynamic. It is not the fight over the pittance. We're gonna be seeing money that we never see before. People are gonna have to thief billions of US dollars, millions and billions without even, you even realize it. So it's big money, so they understand what is to come. It's not a fight about what passed.
Yeah. And the quest for control.
Yeah, control. You see?
I mean...
And you got to understand it, you see, in any economy doesn't develop only domestically. It develops in relationship to external partners. And you see what some Indian leaders in the Comores and Portuguese leaders in the Comores, they know that since the white Europeans, is going to be a major element in this new dispensation, they are strengthening the alliance with those elements at the expense of African and Amerindian people. So they're tightening the grip on the economy, not only domestically, but through external alliances. And the Africans and the Amerindians ain't really catch up yet. They don't realize what's going on. Because they're not tied in commerce, so they doesn't have a natural instinct. You see, if I'm a Guyanese businessman, and I say bringing in Toyota, I got to strike some agreement with the makers of Toyota, Mr. Japan or wherever it is, and me and them have to strike an economic arrangement, and we got a mutual interest. So their interest equals me interest, and me equals their interest. You see? And it's been translated from economics to politics. And if you look at the whole economy, and so that is the way in which things work. So when people strengthen the economic whole upon a country, domestically, they strengthen the economic whole with externally. And both external and internal strengthen them politically. And you who don't have those connections are weakened politically and could be wiped out.
Point taken. So, how do we guard against? I mean, the budget has already given away so much to the private sector, but what can we do to put a check to this runaway train that has already begun?
I think the workers have to begin to show and the leaders show more militancy, because that is the only immediate defense the country have at this moment. You see, the workers have a legitimate right, okay, now that plenty money is on the horizon, to fight. And if the workers keep fighting, the leaders keep fighting, in a way, it will put some restraint on them. But the political opposition also has a role to play. And they have to quickly begin to define, how they see this engagement. I mean, I think for the time being, we have to try to get over the electoral matters. And I don't know whether the PP will allow those election petitions to be held quickly. But the quicker we get over that, regardless of where the chips fall, it will be better, for the opposition, so that you can focus your energies exactly on your line of march. And I think that there's going to be a political nasty fight in Guyana. I could see it over the use of oil money. I could see it. I'm feeling it.
You see, one of the things that has been driving the private sector over the years is the determination of the minimum wage and all of these things by the public, the government. Because you find that they restrict their wages in keeping with what the government is offering, and so the disparity between private and public sector is not pretty great.
Right, it's a conspiracy.
So,
because the government is saying we can't increase public sector wages too high because it can put pressure on the private sector. And the private sectors look at what the government paying and say we can't pay y'all too much. We got to go put pressure on the government sector. So it's a well worked conspiracy, man. And workers and the leaders have to be smart. Force adjustments. The thing about economics and social things is that people adjust. You have to force adjustments, defend your interests, and force the other side to make whatever necessary adjustments they have to make. You see, let us look something like, let me look at the private security sector, which got a lot of women inside and so. And it's a major employment base for women. That in itself is problematic in terms of the effect it got on the women and the family and so on, so forth, so forth, and so. But if you watch what's happening with the rise of technology, where businesses are depending more upon technology for protection and the human element, a time will come that those women will become redundant. You see what I mean? And the private sector don't care. They have no way. They don't put aside the resources that they exploit from workers for redundancy. Once you see the technology increase, that you could have more certainty about security based upon technology rather than the human factor. All them workers and women get thrown into redundancy. And we have to know that oil is on the agenda. I will argue that workers and women rights movements have to switch into gear to begin to fight against that kind of development and to put women into 7 to 4 jobs and put women into jobs that are more safe and the employment is more long term and they get a better wages and salaries. Because at the end of the day, if we keep them there, like how people keeping the sugar workers, if they want them, it's not in the interest of the workers.
Well, you got to be militant. We have to. I know it's going to be quite a struggle to bring people back to that point where they have regained that militancy. We have basically been demoralized, right? And I think we gotta give thanks that some things are happening that not. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but I think some level of not proper thinking is being put in by agents.
You see, the problem with exploitation, my brother, is that once a ruling class is committed to exploiting the population or large sections of the population, okay, the contradiction always leads to problems. You can't manage it 100%, you know. So they can't want to fix the friends in the private sector. They can't want to give, you know, priority to the support base for votes without offending other people. So the nature of that relationship always is troublesome and surprising things, you know. And I'm hopeful. People look, man. We have fought against hundreds of years of slavery and colonialism, and I have no doubt that we could deal with this challenge. It's just a matter of time. And with our leaders and our leadership, you see, we got to continue this debate about, you know, the role of the party in the community and so forth and so forth, you know. Because I think there is where we could, because we have to, I'm clear, I don't know about nobody else. I mean, speaking for myself, I don't think the opposition could wait for the 2025 elections to have a significant renovation of the power base in the country at the present. I think there have to be some struggle before 2025 for major, you know, changes in the government relationship in the place. Because 2025 elections, if we wait just for 2025 elections, you almost know the results. So the opposition have to be clear that they have to wage some form of struggle that will lead to some rearrangement of the power bases long before 2025.
Now the Henry boys, it seems as though they're basically forgotten.
It becomes a cold case.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very concerned. You see, there's the problem you have with these matters. You see, when you take the pressure off of the PPP, okay, that's what you get, you know. And if you watch the newspapers and so, it's gone out to the press.
Yeah, nothing is.
You know, and there's a problem. We don't control, we don't have no significant control of press, so we could keep our narrative, you know, in the forefront of public discourse and consciousness. And I hope that these cases won't become cold cases, you know. But that is the danger you do when you prematurely call off a protest without achieving anything significantly. Yeah. But we have to move on, and we have to learn from our example, our mistakes. I hope we could learn.
All right, let's hope, because the declaration was already made that, you know, nothing significant has been found, and that, you know, nobody.
And I'm yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I'm hearing from PPP sources that the narrative there seems to be trying to develop is that it is drug related. You understand? They want to move it away from politics and ethnicity to drugs. And from the inside, there's some inside information, you know, that is the direction they seems to be trying to push. So that ultimately the explanation you get is a non-ethnic explanation, a non-political explanation, inverted commas, but a drug explanation. But I don't know how they're going to hold them. Because I know what this 70-year-old, 60-year-old had to do with drugs. You know? But I mean, that's the difficulty they have, but they're trying to, you know, and the gang story, there's a direction they're trying to see if they could, you know.
Photographs.
Yeah, you know.
I mean, the students at school make these signs all the time and all of these things. But that doesn't mean that they're in gangs and so on. And they like to, particularly with this, what they call it, TikTok or something like that, on television. They're always posting things that, you know, will be attractive to their friends and so on. You're talking about young people, and they're part of the society and the norms, right? In the 60s, you know about the guys with the razors, switchblades, and all these things, which would have given birth to a lot of the music, the culture in the Caribbean, the bajans and so on. So every era got that kind of
every era got their own peculiar manifestations of these matters.
But it doesn't mean that you can label these youngsters as being part of that kind of activity. We have a few minutes more. I don't know. Uh, we've had, we've talked about the direction of resources. And one of the major concerns that people in the African community would have had, as I did say before, that there was no, reorganizing of the economy to channel resources into the APNU stronghold. A lot of it, it's not the first kind of act in that regard, but a lot of it was channeled into winning votes that you probably thought would have made a difference in the elections. But how did that play out, particularly in the Amerindian communities? How did?
Well, you see, I think we have to, interrogate these things to learn the lessons of it, and also of ourselves as political players, and to widen, the political consciousness of our constituents and the country at large. Now, I think that nobody could argue against resources being directed to internal development. Historically, the coast benefited more than the hinterland, and there has been a discrimination in the hinterland. So, the argument can't be that resources shouldn't be directed to hinterland development. The problem that we have here, the APMU seems to have faced with, and we got to discuss it. You see, I think you in terms of government policies, you have to make a distinction between a government policy, economic policy, that is important and will lead to gains to the national economy. Okay, and there's one yardstick you use to determine that, whether that will actually play out the way you want it to play out. But you can't automatically assume that they're going to result in electoral support. So I think that you have to make a distinction between policies that are intended for the general improvement of the national economy as distinct from policies that is intended to win over, constituencies to vote for you. I don't think the coalition had studied those contradictions, correctly, and to find the right balance. I think my sense is that they thought that if you spend these expenditures into the hinterland and you promote towns and developments, all which is necessary, that it would generate into electoral votes. And we saw it didn't play that way. And you see, there's some policies that could lead to electoral votes in the long run, like over 2 election cycle, where people begin to see the benefits of this new road and whatever you do in the community. But if you make the mistake to believe that those things, which are more long-term in delivering to you, will deliver for you in a few years that you have towards the elections, and you read it wrong, you run into trouble. And I think we read it wrong. Yeah. We read it wrong. We didn't study the Amerindian community particular. And the interland community also have non-Amerindians, but I'm talking now more the Amerindians, because I think most of the interland community, the non-Amerindians, voting a sort of way. The Africans, they vote for the APMU, the Indians, they vote for the PPP. But the Amerindians as a distinct indigenous people, as a distinct group, historically they have shared the votes between the PPP, the PNC, or the APMU. UF when UF was active and so on. But once they develop in the equation an Amerindian party and begin to articulate and to mobilize Amerindians on the basis of ethnicity, okay, your ability to influence the Amerindian votes becoming more complicated. And I think the APM get caught in all of that. They are caught in the rise of the new Amerindian party and the advocacy and so forth. But more importantly, I think they misread the psychology of the Amerindian community. You see, you could build a road that cut through Amazonian community, linking, like we say, just hypothetically, we say linking Guyana to Brazil. The people who benefit from the road is the coastal business people and the urban business people. The Amazonian man, he still got to go through the bush with the thing over his shoulder and the machete and thing. The road doesn't mean anything to him. It may mean something to him probably 10 years from now, but immediately doesn't mean anything to him.
I think I have to continue the discourse next week because time has caught up with us. But it's an interesting point that you're making, and possibly next week we can continue to talk about it. But I want to thank the people who have been watching the program. Thank you for being with us as usual and for supporting the WPA in whatever way. We're going to be continuing our call for your support from time to time as we move forward in this new dispensation. Do have a good night. Remember to look for the program on YouTube and look for it on Wednesday nights on Facebook through Kedaki Amsterdam's Facebook channel. Do have a good night. See you next week, same time, for another program of Walter Rodney Groundings.
Smart, don't be a gruff, no. Life, it's a journey, it's a long race. Mama says, son, be wise and don't bring disgrace. So me take up the broom and start sweep the place. Cause all these ways, they got to get erased. I love to me people that me embrace. The truth are the truth and that can't erase. So hell to all of those who want hate. Just send me to finish this race. So we ain't